My name's Caleb Jones. I'm one of the ClinApp specialists with SGRT over the kind of part of the western region. So this little presentation is more about immobilization. Kind of a little thought is less is more. Kind of we're going to go into what that means and why. Creating of the VAC locks in different scenarios. Feel free to ask questions at any point. If there's a slide that you want me to go back to, just ask. I'll go back. If there's just any questions, just ask. I'm happy to answer anything. A little more open forum. Plus, if somebody doesn't know the answer, or if I don't know the answer, there's usually somebody in the crowd that they've had some sort of experience with that as well. So, immobilization with SGRT. Why immobilization is so important with SGRT. What do we mean by less is more? How to use open face mask and VAC locks while attributing to a great SGRT style setup. And then we'll be including a live demo. Civco's here to help us with that, so that's very nice. And then towards the end, we're going to give it over to them to let them debut one of their new masks that is SGRT compatible. So originally, how did we set up every patient? Full face masks. When we did immobilization for extremities, we'd wrap it like a taco, completely encompass the leg, and then you'd have to almost break it open so they could get their leg out. That's not necessarily what you want to try to accomplish now. I'll say topography. Throughout this, you want surface anatomy, surface topography. When you say topography, you don't think of a flat surface most of the time. You think of hills or mountains. The system needs to be able to see those things so that you're not just looking at a flat surface. And if all they can see is an inch of the patient's shin or something like that, you're not giving the system the topography it needs to see what it needs to see. So we're not able to see the patient's skin if they're wearing a mask. So what are they doing under the mask? Well, if they have an open face mask, and there's so many different solutions and answers out there to what we can use for an open face mask. Less is more. So I'll end up coming back to this picture, but what is less is more? Less what obstructing the camera, less VAC lock, less cushions, less masks, and less fabric. This fabric is one that I see a lot of the times that it just kind of slips by there. In sim, you're like, okay, you're doing your checks. I made sure that we didn't extend past midline on the leg. We pulled the mask right, different things like that. Generally, you're not going to get too much fabric on the mask. But shirts, so they'll pull the shirt up instead of taking the shirt off, so you'll have a roll of a shirt where the ROI is. That's not what you want to do. You want to try to make sure that there's nothing bunching under the patient anyways for an optimal setup, but you need to be able to see that. And so what's that going to do? It's going to give us more surface anatomy to draw an ROI. If you block all of the area to draw an ROI, of course you can't draw a region of interest. So making sure that things are out of the way is very helpful and conducive to a great setup. So we're not saying to not use a setup or any immobilization. For instance, this is a great setup. The patient still is indexed with a wing board. You can index that the lower knee wedge, but there's not a bunch of shirt bunched up or pants bunched up if the ISO was down lower. There's not cradle curving up over that patient's ISO center. Given the system, the ability to see the patient and monitor is key and crucial to setting yourself up. You want to set yourself up for success. So during treatment capture or monitoring, the surface automatically registers to the reference ROI to determine the patient's misalignment. So essentially what that means is all the purple is the reference image, but your delta values are only coming from that white ROI. So you're not going to get delta values because the patient's sitting there talking. Well, I mean, you could actually since it's on his thorax, but but in general, the delta values or the changes in anatomy it's coming from that white ROI, not from the rest of it. So you can see in this example, they've excluded the abdomen so that they're not getting a lot of breathing motion, so that they get a better accurate depiction of what's happening to that patient in terms of actual movement, if they are coughing or something like that. So again, although the entire reference surface is displayed, only the ROI is being used for the registration. If the cameras can't see the ROI because it's blocked or covered by immobilization, then we can't perform an accurate match. So making sure things are out of the way. These are just examples of scenarios that you'll see. And it's essentially just letting you know that you need to do something to fix that. They're not necessarily showstoppers because there's a fix for everything. So this is telling you that there's insufficient service overlap to increase the ROI or move closer to the reference. So for instance, kind of field of view. A CT has a field of view. You can't scan the patient's head and expect to align to the thorax because you only scan the head, not the thorax. If the patient's not near the ISO in the machine's field of view, it's not going to be able to tell you what's aligned because you don't have the patient close enough for it to start actually monitoring and registering where that patient's location is real time. Another reason you'd get this is if, in this instance, this is a left breast. When you're rotating from the medial tangent to the lateral tangent, an ROI like this, you're going to block the main or primary camera that's looking at that ROI. The vast majority of the delta values that are being displayed would be coming from this camera on this side of the patient, on the left side. So once you rotate the camera to block it, yes, the other cameras can kind of see it, but the vast majority of that lateral and anterior is being blocked from that camera. So if it's unable to see at least 25% of the surface, you're going to get that error. And another way to fix that, for instance, if it's a VMAT arc and so you need it to not do that, is to include ipsilateral and contralateral ROIs. Make sure that the opposite, breast is included with an ROI. So by extending ROI coverage, you're able to see what's going on, patient's movement and breathing, and have it be affected less by any kind of camera blockage. Because you want to try to have at least 2 cameras being able to see the patient at all time. So that's pretty key. This ROI propagation failed or default. It says failed. It's not really failed. It's notifying you to please look at the ROI because it is trying to do an overlay and a match. It's based off a percentile. And so if it's not exactly matched, so if you made a shift or something like that, the patient's a little different than what the DICOM originally was, and it's going to notify you. It's essentially just saying, look at the ROI. You may have to do a little bit of adjustment to it, editing it, just to make sure it looks great. And then, of course, you want to filter out any of the pieces that ROI that might have got projected through. So proper immobilization is crucial for meeting our 4 ROI rules. So draw ROI to include the ISO center if possible and surrounding areas. So pretty much everybody's seen Adam's view or presentation. So we did take a little bit from his, but it's because it's super important. ROIs are what's going to set you up for a great success. So ensuring the ROI extends laterally to the patient's midline to ensure delta readout if the camera is occluded. Include a stable surface that includes patient topography, and ensure to only include the patient's skin in the ROI. So that means you don't want to include this gown or any of the immobilization devices, clothing, table, etc. Just the patient's skin. You want to monitor the patient. So kind of 2 and 4 are very similar and they coincide very well. Vac locks. When making a vac lock, just try not to extend the device over where the ROI would be. Kind of like we was talking about on the thoraxes, lung. You don't want to wrap them up. Same with the leg. You don't want to go over the midline of the patient. You can kind of see on this. I know it wouldn't always be this case. We did do an exaggeration of what you'd wrap, but I have seen people wrap hips like this because they wanted to keep the patient from moving laterally. So this would have blocked any of our ROI that we'd get from the lateral aspect. All we would have was an anterior view to look at. So by making sure that still using immobilization but optimizing it for yourself is going to be the main thing that you want to do. Part of, for instance, doing a leg, so it's kind of hard to tell without him in here. We didn't extend this vac lock past his midline of his leg, so his leg was still, half of it was out. What you want to do is include an actual stop point or anchor point, so a foot or a joint, something like that, so that you get good acknowledgement from the machine on rotation, longitudinal, and lateral changes. Again, the 4 rules. So this is kind of an example of what some of the people have done for a setup for extremity. So there's so many different ways to do it. And the key is to do it in a way that's reproducible and comfortable to the patient so that you can give them a great ROI. So in this case, it'd be something like a wedge, or they'll use styrofoam and trace the patient's arm on there so that they can match it. The way that I've also seen it done is AccuForm cushions, things like that, because usually you're not molding an AccuForm cushion all the way around. If you're doing something like the arm, you can really index the hand into AccuForm cushions really well. So again, you can, with this one, you'd be able to get great values from that. And then you also want to include that elbow joint. So you want to go up on the humerus and down onto the forearm as well. So here's a good example of ROI for a leg. You can see that it includes the knee joint and extends. So it doesn't extend equally from the isocenter, but it does include a joint. And you do want to try to keep it close to the ROI as possible. I mean, as close to the isocenter as possible. So the reason you want to do a joint is so that it doesn't look cylindrical. It's kind of back to the topography. It gives the ability to see what's going on. It gives that firm stop in terms of longitudinal or lateral access of what's going on. So it's also, if you include the knee, it gives you really great values on the rotation because it can actually see which way you need to go. Different things like that. So things that you wouldn't want to include, you want to make it where it's not just cylindrical shape in a flat surface. You want to make sure that it isn't including the back lock or anything like that. So if you're trying to monitor on the back lock and the patient's skin, granted you wouldn't want to do that anyways, it's not going to be the same. The patient can lay down in this cradle almost the same way every day, but there's always going to be a little bit inherent misalignment from when they laid down the day before. Because you know you've had the patient sit up and lay down again to try to adjust them into the cradle. So the key is to just try to get them as comfortable and fitting areas that don't overdraw on the ROIs. So before I get into talking about masks, does anybody have any questions about vac locks, ROIs for the vac locks, or extremities? Yes.
So would you recommend that on extremity that include like a joint if you're doing the arm or leg?
So I'm going to kind of go back onto that. If you can include the elbow, that's great. Also, even if you're kind of doing closer to the shoulder, if you can include just good stable landmarks in that area and to have a little bit of the joint and not just mid-humerus. If you could include part, not really the top of the shoulder, but towards the top and not rub the microphone so loud. I was wondering why I was getting loud. So including joints best you can, and that's where making sure you don't wrap the patient with the vac lock, because that's where you kind of set yourself up and you're sitting there kind of crushing the vac lock down so you can get your great ROI for alignment. This does wonders for getting your couch kick and pitch and roll set correctly the first time, especially when it's less indexing like this. You know, yeah, I put his left finger on his belly button. Yeah, you can get interesting setups from sim. So optimizing and setting yourself up for success is key. Any other questions about vac locks or extremities?
You can have more than one ROI, right?
You can, but you're not going to monitor all of them at once.
But for initial setup,
Yes.
more than one.
Yes. Yeah, you can have different ROIs and look at different things, whether it's at the ISO or a little bit off ISO. Yes. So yeah, there's different tools that really help you set it up. And using the treatment capture function and using that to overlay with the reference image does wonders too. It can really help get any gross misalignment out before you start doing any fine-tune adjustments. So before I start with the head and neck and mask, UCSD published a paper in neurosurgery showing that we can give same clinical outcomes as more invasive approaches with significantly improved patient comfort, faster treatment times, and open masks to track the actual patient during all couch angles. So we do have, whatever brand of mask you have, we do have SGRT compatible masks with them at this website. So if you go to our website, it is labeled on our website. But so much of the time with masks anyways, how many times have you had a patient ask if we can cut the mask for this reason or that reason? Having these open face masks are a great option for that. It gives the patient a lot of times just a degree of comfort not having their face completely enclosed. And then even at that, with some of these shells, if you're going further into treatment, some of these head and necks, they do lose weight, and if they lose weight, they're able to kind of look left and right in the mask. If you have granted, some people would rescan, remake a mask, but you would be able to see stuff like that. If you have a mask with open face, you could see if they turn their head to look a little bit. So giving yourself the ability to monitor what's on the other side of that mask is a really nice feature. So SRS Brain, you can see the mask here. This is a great pull. The keys to this are, and a lot of people ask about open face mask, are rigidity. You want to make sure you give yourself a firm, stable point on the forehead and a firm, stable point on the chin. So you want to cup the chin, cup the forehead. You can do it by yourself, but we always recommend 2 people just in general because it's so much easier, especially when you're pulling some of the open face masks so that the forehead doesn't slip back. The second person sits there and gives them firm, stable landmarks or stable locations for the pull. So, and soup to imp, sort of, you want to go 4 to 5 cm above the eyebrow, kind of close to the hairline, just depends on that patient. Some people's hair comes a little lower than others, some doesn't. So it's about 4 or 5 cm above the eyebrows for superiorly. The mask, just pointing out, rigid chin. You don't want to include the lips in that ROI because those are movable. So if they're sitting there, you don't want them moving around anyways. But if they are starting to scrunch their lips, that would start giving you some of your delta values adjusting and changing. And then lateral surface. So the key on that is not to, again, include hair because hair is a very movable structure. So what you, on this case, essentially, you would just draw an ROI a little below the mask in front of her hair and then kind of just to her nose, a little below her nose. For an example, with the SRS, a lot of SRSs have a couch kick. It wouldn't be easy if it didn't have a couch kick, so I would expect a couch kick. But you can see what's happening here is this camera is completely blocked because the scan tree is off about 40 degrees. You have about a 90-degree couch kick. And then that camera can't see anything, but that's okay. You set yourself up for success. You have great stable landmarks, you have a great mask, and then this camera, our Pod 3 camera, can see the patient's surface, and our Pod 1 camera can see the patient's surface. So keeping it where preferably 2 cameras can see the patient at all times is part of setting yourself up for great treatment. And if they move, you'd be able to see that. So back to kind of drawing the ROI, a little better explanation. So you can see how they drew it in. It's a little bit inside of the mask, so it's not cutting it too close to the mask surface, so that we know that we're drawing it on a stable surface. They included the nose, so laterally, outer canthus to anterior of the tragus, depending on hair. I mean, you probably couldn't quite do that anterior on me. And then ensure there's a small gap between the edge of the field and the mask. Things you don't want to include: the mouth, the mask, the hair, sideburns, bangs. I've seen this on real patients. You want to try to avoid that because you're monitoring the mask and something inside the mask that can move. So setting yourself up for awesome treatment by not including that part of the mask. Another question you get a lot is eyes. Most of the time I tell my patients just to keep their eyes closed so that they don't have the red light in their face. Some places want their eyes closed or open, vice versa, depending on what you're treating. You can cut the eyes out of this. So if you're worried about eyelashes or eye fluttering or blinking, anything like that, looking around, this is sensitive enough to pick up that kind of motion. So removing that from your ROI can also help, especially with these really high tolerance cases like an SRS. So we're going to make a mask. So I need a volunteer to help pull a mask. Who wants to pull a mask? I'm going to pick somebody. So feel free to come up and take a look if you want while they're making this mask. I'll point out a few things about it. The key is, again, to give yourself nice, stable landmarks. And so it's not always possible to have two therapists or whatever in the sim, but it is nice. So you're going to see one person is getting everything kind of ready and lined up. They're lining up where they want the... So you want to try to pull both sides equally down so you're getting even stretch on both sides of the mask. And then the second person's holding those stable landmarks at the same time, ensuring that the mask isn't slipping off the forehead or slipping down the chin. And so this is actually really good. He's got great forehead on there. Ben, you have a great forehead. Then you can still see we got great lateral. That mask could come anterior if you wanted a little bit. Some people do like to cover more of the ear, some not so much. It's really up to you and your department on that. But you still have, thank you for your help. So you still have a lateral view. And so again, flat surface isn't going to give you everything that you need on a lateral rotation, and laterals and rotations. But by allowing yourself, setting yourself up to win. So this side I might have brought up a little bit, but it's okay. I would just adjust my ROI. It's not the end of the world. You don't necessarily have to cut your mask. You can just make sure you know that, and when you adjust your ROI to match what you have here. And that would be, again, keeping the ROI inside the mask and on the patient's surface at all times. Include the nose. On this case, I'd bring it almost to his lip. So I'd include all the nose. I wouldn't include the lip, of course. And then monitor it. So, yeah, let the technology do all the work for you. Don't make your job harder than it necessarily needs to be. Somebody was asking earlier about different head cushions. Whatever is going to help the patient be more comfortable and whatever your center is okay with. If your center's okay with AccuForm, I would absolutely do an AccuForm if the patient said their head hurt. So whatever is your center wants to do to keep the patient comfortable. A comfortable patient's a less moving patient, and if they don't move, then you're not having to stop the treatment or re-image the patient, realign. So you're going to help them. Keeping it a quick SRS treatment. Nobody likes the hour-and-a-half, 3 ISO SRS treatment. But unfortunately, sometimes that's inevitable. But setting yourself up for a quick treatment, great alignment, great monitoring, it's going to help not exacerbate the issue at hand with any of that. And then mainly just set yourself up for success. That's the key on that. Does anybody have any questions about the mask or making the mask or ROIs? Go ahead. Yeah. Some people want to cover the mouth, some don't. It's up to you. The main thing is to make sure that the chin has a nice, firm set structure, because you don't want it loose or like where there's nothing on the bottom of the mouth or down here. That's what's going to keep you and help you with your pitch beforehand. So yes, you could pull it up a little higher. Yes, you could pull it down a little bit lower. That's fine. The main thing is stable chin, nice solid rigidity to the chin, to the forehead. I think there's another question over here. This one's reinforced. It's still clear. It's still hot. Reinforcement takes longer to cool. So once it hardens. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the chin placement is a little different. Some people put the stretch value over the chin. It's really up to you. Is whatever you find is the optimal position. The thing is you don't want to start really stretching the mask once you've already pulled it and started setting. You want to try to make sure that you, again, set yourself up for success with a nice, firm chin hold and forehead.